To your first genetics video. I apologize that you may hear children in the background, but just try to ignore them. If you could open up your green note package to the very first page, we're going to go through some of the notes as well as the definitions. So the first little bit there is filling in what is genetics. Really, all I really want you to know about this is genetics is the study of heredity, okay, and how we get inherited traits. Okay, that's really what genetics is. It's just studying how traits are passed from parents to offspring. Again, you may remember from Science 9 talking about discrete and continuous variations. Okay, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about, but in a more in-depth way. So, genes and alleles. We need to define the difference between the two simply because we do use the words interchangeably, and I want you to know what we're talking about. So, remember, you have 2 copies of every gene, one from mom, one from dad. Now, an allele is the alternative form of the same gene. So we can inherit a gene from our father, but that is different than the gene from our mother. Okay? So that's kind of what you have to understand. Genes are what tells us all about who we are, but we can have different types of alleles to make up who we are. So let's go through some of the vocabulary you're going to need to know for this unit. So first one is gene. So again, I said it's a specific unit on a chromosome which codes for a particular trait. So, for example, here's a gene. Now, we're going to use the same example going all the way through, talking about which hands we write with. You can include the examples in your notes if you want to help you, remember, but you don't have to. All right? So I will kind of point, if there's a longer definition, what to write down. So, an allele. Again, we already said this, but it's the alternate form of a gene. Okay, all traits are controlled by 2 alleles. So, you can have a gene for right-handedness. An allele that controls right-handedness or an allele that controls being left-handed. Now we're going to get into the vocabulary that's really key for this. So, we're going to talk about dominant alleles. So, a dominant allele is one that masks the effects of any other allele. We always represent that with a large capital letter. Okay? So anything, sorry, my child's crying in the background. So anything that we talk about that is dominant will be indicated with a capital letter. Okay? So when we talk about writing hands, being right-handed is dominant over being left-handed. Okay? So where there's dominant alleles, we have recessive alleles. So this is just the version of the gene that the dominant allele doesn't allow to come through or masks. We always represent recessive alleles with a little letter. Now, here's important to note. If we're talking about the same trait, like in the last one we were talking about right-handedness being dominant, in this case, left-handed is recessive. But because we're talking about the same gene, we need to remember that we need to use the same letter. So in the last example, it was a capital R. In this example, it's a lowercase r. But we use R because we're talking about the same thing. So genotype. This is just a trait that is represented by a combination of alleles. It's essentially our genetics. So when you write it down, you can just say a genotype is a gene that makes up a trait, and it's represented usually by this kind of combination of letters. Dominant letters and recessive letters. Now, individuals who are right-handed, because it's the dominant gene, would have this kind of genetic makeup or this genotype. RR capitalized or RR with a capital and a lowercase. Simply is showing that if you have a big R, you're going to have the dominant gene. Individuals who are left-handed and recessive, in order to be the recessive form of the gene and actually express it, so meaning actually be left-handed, you have to have 2 little r's. Now, on the flip side, there's the phenotype. The phenotype is actually what we see. So it's the physical appearance of the trait. So being either right-handed or left-handed. I'm right-handed, but I don't know if my genetics are big R, little r, or big R, big R. Okay? We can kind of deduce and guess what we think they could be by looking at subsequent generations. So looking at my children and seeing what they become for handedness, and we can look above generations, so looking at what your parents are. That can give you an indication, but we can only see phenotype, we cannot see genotype. So then we're going to get into some wording that you have not seen before, but you definitely need to learn. So get this in your notes and start memorizing what these mean. So the word homozygous, meaning same, homo meaning same, and dominant. So this shows two dominant traits. Well, what does that mean essentially? It is the one you saw earlier that is two capital letters together, big R, little r. Someone who is homozygous dominant, okay, will have two dominant genes at their alleles. So again, they would express the phenotype of being right-handed, but their genotype is actually two dominant alleles. That is different than homozygous recessive. Homo meaning same, but this time talking about recessive. This has to show two recessive traits. So again, if a person is left-handed, they have the recessive traits. They have to express the two lowercase r's. If you had two lowercase r's, you would express the phenotype of left-handedness, and you would have the genotype of two lowercase r's. Then there's one in between, heterozygous. So this is a mixture, okay? Just like heterogeneous in Science 10, Science 8 means visible parts, they're a mixture of stuff. That's the same idea here. This has both one dominant allele and one recessive allele, or one dominant trait and one recessive trait. And we actually refer to these people as carriers because this is their genotype, big R, little r. Someone who is heterozygous has the potential to pass on either the dominant gene or the recessive gene. But their genotype shows both traits, but they express as a phenotype right-handedness because R, capital R, is a dominant trait. So it is masking the little r. Okay, I went through that fairly quickly, so I would go back, pause through the slides, and get down your different definitions. I am checking to make sure these notes are completed because on Friday we have a vocab quiz that you are going to be doing. Each day I'm going to be checking that you are filling out your notes in your book, because if you are not, it is not going to make any sense when we go through anything else the day after. So please make sure you are watching these videos and getting them done.